This is the news of the day, all right? I'm Walter Cronkite, or whoever you want to name me. But just to look back at the last meeting that we had, the big event was the capture of Atlanta, if you remember that. And I'm going to pick it up right from there. This will be the report of October 1864, okay? We've already been past Gettysburg and Vicksburg and Atlanta. And now we're in the month of October of 1864. Now, the significance of the capture of Atlanta was obvious to both North and the South. It was a pretty important event. In the North, it was helpful to Mr. Lincoln's campaign for re-election as president. To the South, this was offsetting the criticism and the downside of the situation, because at Petersburg there was still a continual threat that was a continual threat to, Mr. Lincoln's campaign for re-election was helped by the capture of Atlanta, but this was offset by the stalemate at Petersburg, because they expected something big to happen at Petersburg that would end the war, because it was right near Richmond. You capture Richmond, you win the war. But there was a stalemate there. And to the South, there was a continual threat of Early in Shenandoah. But to the South, it was an intolerable incursion that must be eradicated if possible. So they were struggling at Shenandoah. By the end of September, General Hood, after conferring with Jefferson Davis, moved out to sever Sherman's lengthy supply line between Chattanooga and Atlanta. This was critical to sustain the capture of Atlanta. Hood had hoped to force Sherman to pull back from Atlanta to Chattanooga. But General Forrest was operating in North Alabama and Tennessee against the railroads, and often attempted to force a withdrawal from Sherman's troops. So in other words, they wanted to cut off his supply line. And to do that, they would have to threaten the supply line and force Sherman to bring troops out of Atlanta back up to Chattanooga to help them relieve Atlanta. Meanwhile, General Forrest, operating north of Alabama and Tennessee against railroads, also attempted to force the withdrawal of some of Sherman's troops. At Petersburg, Grant had extended his lines, but failed to break through anywhere. Sheridan had believed that he had beaten the enemy, but the small and gallant Confederate force in Shenandoah was reorganizing, receiving some reinforcements, and looking for some new advance. In short, the uncertainty of both sides indicated that the fall would see some new military moves. In the South, new doubts resulted from the unnerving loss of Confederate territory. So the Union was making considerable inroads in capturing Southern territory, as, for example, Atlanta. So on Sunday, October the 1st, the Shenandoah was quiet. as Sheridan prepared to pull back north towards Cedar Creek from Harrisonburg. At Petersburg, the siege continued to grind on. The next day, on Sunday, October the 2nd, the Army of Tennessee reached Sherman's supply line, where General Hood's men broke the Western and Atlantic Railroad and broke the federal link between Atlanta and Chattanooga. So there was an effective change right there, because his supply line to Atlanta is going to be broken unless something is done immediately. So on Monday, October the 3rd, Sherman was forced to challenge Hood's operation and began sending troops back from Atlanta to cope with what had become a far more than a nuisance effort. Hood's troops increased their grip on Chattanooga and the Atlantic Railroad, and Sherman, leaving one corps in Atlanta, was on his way to rescue his various beleaguered troops along the railroad. On Wednesday, October the 5th, Sherman sent a message to General Corse, who was guarding the railroad supply line in Alatoona, Georgia, and telling him to hold fast. Help is coming. And that's exactly what General Corse did. He was very successful in holding off the Confederates. But then on Wednesday, October the 12th, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, who was the deciding factor in the Dred Scott decision, he died in Washington. And his decision caused a great deal of problems for the Union-Confederate relationship. On Thursday, October the 13th, Maryland voters adopted a new state constitution which included the abolition of slavery. So they went on their own and follow up after the Emancipation Proclamation. And then on Monday, October the 17th, the Army of Tennessee under General Hood had practically given up harassing Sherman's Chattanooga-Atlanta rail line and moved towards Gadsden, Alabama. So they gave up. On Wednesday, October the 19th, war came to Vermont. Can you imagine that? How did they get up to Vermont to start a war? Confederate Lieutenant Bennett H. Young and about 25 Confederate soldiers descended on St. Albans, Vermont, some 15 miles from the Canadian border. Young, operating from Canada, planned to burn and loot several towns. The Southerners robbed 3 banks of over $200,000 at St. Albans. The citizens began to resist. One was mortally wounded and others hurt. In half an hour, the Confederates were gone and they were pursued over the border, where Young and 12 others were arrested, and about 75,000 of the 200,000 was recovered. But in Maryland, in Washington, they serenaded the president, who responded by saying, quote, "I am struggling to save government, not to overthrow it. I am struggling especially to prevent others from overthrowing it." He was referring to the charges and rumors that the Democrats reportedly would seize the government immediately if the nominee were elected. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And that, my friends, is the report of the day. Okay?